has to come to this. It's the day of retribution.
And welcome to another episode of the Autonomist Lounge. So I want to address a few more MRA anti-feminist talking points that were posted in the comments section in my Why Women Initiate Most of the Divorces. First, I have to say that the gentleman that so far had the most creative criticism of me, he said that I was the Clayton Bigsby of gender politics. In other words, the blind Klansman who spoke out against black people, and he happened to be black. I am a blind feminist, not knowing that I am going against my own interests. Now, I appreciate also that in one of my rebuttals to him, he pointed out that there were indeed statistics indicating that if a woman has one risk factor, such as a drug addiction or mental illness, she is 3 times more likely to still get custody of her children than a man with one risk factor, according to the Washington State Residential Time Survey. Well, I'm still looking into if those numbers also reflect the same unevenness in other parts of the country and the world. Washington State is, after all, Washington State. And I do have a close friend of mine who lost custody of her children to her loser ex-husband, who was allergic to a steady paycheck, and at that time, they lived near Everett, Washington. Now, it turns out that she wanted to leave Everett and go back to her native New York. She lost the case, but feels that she did so because she represented herself and also suspected that the judge had an issue with her being both Jewish and she was strong-willed during the proceedings. That was just her feeling. Anyway, she lost, and that was indeed Washington State. Now, he's still a drunk and unemployed, and the youngest daughter actually had to move to New York City, something about being hungry all the time and not going to school, as her reason for moving in back with Mama. And if you would like to know that a major factor to the ending of their marriage had more to do with the fact that she spent years being the hot hippie housewife and then later had to work 2 jobs, 3 if you count the house management and the child rearing. The dad just lived like old Paul Elam used to with his first marriage, unemployed and taken care of by the wife. So yes, while I made a general guess that men typically lose in custody battles if they were fighting for full custody, you pointed out that there were real numbers than just a guess. And I'm still looking to see if other factors may have something to do with that. Let us look at, however, a little history involving the tender years doctrine, since, sir, you brought it up. Now I need to make something clear. Make no mistake that in the face of actual historical context, when we talk about oppression, whether it be gender, race, or class, the few instances or even hard numbers and facts where a group of people who have always been on the advantaged end of that history might have a disadvantage absolutely does not throw things on an even playing field or somehow erases history and reality. The situation is still not about an all-powerful feminist state. Now, according to clinical child psychologist Joan B. Kelly, Ph.D., in divorce until the mid-19th century, fathers had a near absolute right to custody, regardless of the circumstances. Joan Kelly goes on to write that the paternal preference was gradually replaced by a maternal preference based on the tender years doctrine. The doctrine was originally invoked to determine temporary custody arrangements in English law, giving the mother's custody of infants only until they were ready to be returned to the father. Now, this doctrine gave way to a tendency, if you will, where the courts favor maternal custody regardless of the circumstances. You might say it's more of a cultural tendency rather than negligence on behalf of most family courts. However, most feminists that I know, and I happen to know more radical feminists and Marxist feminists than I know moderate ones, would favor a more egalitarian custody decision. and would agree that an unfit mother should not have custody over the father who may provide a stable and caring environment. Of course, provided that the father himself is not fucked up. Then there would be alternative answers to that. Now, Mary Ann Mason, professor of social welfare at the University of California at Berkeley and author of The Custody Wars, Why Children Are Losing the Legal Battle and What We Can Do About It, writes in her summary of the history of child custody, no known English court gave custody to a mother over an unfit father until 1774. Even then, instances were rare. Now, later in the 1800s, especially during the Industrial Revolution, as men began working further away from home and women became the primary caretakers of children. Caroline Norton, a prominent British feminist and writer, campaigned for the right of women to have custody of their children. She worked with politicians and eventually was able to convince the British Parliament to enact legislation, and that legislation spread to other states and countries, including the U.S. But know that the tender years doctrine has been abolished by the end of the 20th century in the U.S. and the U.K. I did not have time to research further when it comes to other countries. The doctrine has been replaced by the best interest child rights principle. Granted, with the unfairness men experience when they do pursue full custody of their children in the face of an unfit mother, that in no way reverses or erases the existence of everyday sexism and patriarchy. This dude then brought up the gendered language of the Duluth Model. How about the gendered language of the Duluth Model? The language bit is about statistics and facts and history. I will provide the link to the Duluth Model website in the low bar. I find it interesting that things that feminists have been working on, one of the most effective models that deals with domestic violence, which is the Duluth Model, is targeted due to the gendered language. As a man, I'm not offended by the gendered language because the truth is the truth. But simply put, the Duluth Model is rooted in feminist theory that takes in the batterer's status being higher in society along social, economic, and political lines, and how historically society, the courts, and law enforcement has sided with the batterer, or at least has let the batterer get away with the abuse that they were committing, and the fact that the batterer is often male. Notice that I said often, not only male. I believe as a man with stronger physique that I have been socially conditioned to feel that might makes right, and my might can be used to control the situation between me and those who are on unequal footing to me. Children are on an unequal footing, and so would a woman that I'm partnered with if she were dependent on my money and if her living situation and standards were dependent on me as well. I have, as a man, come to understand how violence can not only be used to subjugate those who are smaller or weaker, but the threat of it can be used as a control mechanism. The Duluth Model takes on the position that women and children are vulnerable to violence because of their unequal social, economic, and political status in society. Violence aimed at women by men is still a problem. When an older douchebag male, for instance, can message a young woman via Facebook that he wants to rape her, he is using rape as a threatening tool. With men committing over 75% of all criminal assaults, and women are killed 4 times more often than men in domestic homicides, it is only right to label the disparity by gender. Whether we know that there are instances of women battering men, I do not think that when men are battered by their female or same-sex partners, that it is in any way less of a problem. However, the Duluth Model, which seeks intervention not only from law enforcement, but an entire community, from shelters to mandatory re-education of the batterer. What you all hate about the gendered language is that it lays bare the role of society being the reinforcer, that violence is either some personal pathology and not a cultural and social conditioning of men. Then he goes on to ask about circumcision. Feminists didn't create circumcision. Who happens to dominate the world of medicine, especially taking in the account of when it started as a mass practice, which was 1914? See, you sound like all the other MRAs who love to look over the fence at what feminists do and ape their causes. So in other words, when women got together and tried to go to the UN, and I remember this was headed by Alice Walker amongst other activists, to speak out against female circumcision, you guys have suddenly felt that, hey, male circumcision is an issue too. And you don't seem to want to care that much about what is involved with female genital mutilation, because I don't even want to call it circumcision. They don't just remove the hood of the clitoris, and we all know this. There's actual removing of parts of the clitoris. Then you've got the fact that those who practice this are not using the most sterile equipment, plus they're doing this on girls who are of puberty age. Yeah, I have a bigger problem with female circumcision. I've witnessed 2 bris, considering who I'm married to, and yes, the boy is not jumping up and singing the Yankee Doodle when it happens. He is in pain. I do agree principally that when it happens to boys as infants, you're talking about someone who's not aware of what's happening and has no say in what is happening. I also have a problem with male circumcision in some parts of the world where then it's practiced on males who are of puberty age, which means you are dealing with age or where they're not only experiencing the pain, but will most likely be traumatized by it because they can actually remember it. So finally, I do think that circumcising someone who doesn't have a voice yet is wrong. Does that make you feel good? Because I'm actually shrugging my shoulders as I'm saying that. I'm glad I don't have the meat sock because that is a little extra work in the hygiene area down south. What about us having to be willing to be drafted in order to vote? I thought they ended that, to be honest with you. But guess what? Feminists had nothing to do with that. Men do, because the last time I looked, old ass men who are in the military, industrial, and government sectors of managing wars. Not women and not feminists. Blame the patriarchy. Feminists control universities. Okay, tell me how the fuck do they control them? And while you're at it, I want you to tell me how many universities are ran by women and how many of their vice presidents are women versus men. Because that is where the real power is on any given campus. The way I see it, if you are a male, you're only enduring 4 years of having to ask a girl to kiss her or ask if y'all can fuck. And maybe you're probably going through a situation where you're being told how awful white guys are by some random person of color. Understand that you're only doing that or dealing with that shit for 4 years. Then after that, you graduate. And the boardroom, sir, is yours for the rest of your life, where you will be listened to, even though you write emails with 4th grade fucking grammar. The fuck out of here with that shit. Now I'm being asked, do you accept that the police and the courts tend to discriminate against blacks? Oh, is this the part where I walk into a trap? Yes, the answer is yes. Did you realize that white men are more likely to end up pulled over, arrested, or incarcerated than black women? See, here's the thing, dude. I am not Big J Triple X, nor am I that scumbag, Sparky Fister, nor am I that useless Boris tit known as Bass Fuzz or Bisfaz or whatever fuck. Anyway, moving on. I'm not one of these dudes. You cannot use the MRA mind trick on me to think that just because something doesn't happen to women, but it happens to men, I'm supposed to realize that women are my enemy. So in other words, if it's men who are most likely pulling over white males before black females, you're not going to get me to hate on black females, dude. Are you fucking kidding me? I want you to tell me when the last time you heard of a white man who was pulled over by the cops and they found that white man lynched in his cell. Tell me another situation where a white male went out the way that Rekia Boyd went out. See, when white men are killed by the police, and they are, no way in equal to the numbers of what when it happens to African Americans or Latinos, you guys get shot and killed because your sense of entitlement puts you there. A lot of you motherfuckers have no problem dropping a fucking bead on a cop. So yes, I know that white dudes get shot, but that's because you motherfuckers start thinking that you're a direct descendant of Jesse James or William H. Bonney. Seriously, dude, no. You're not going to get me to hate black women because something that happens to you more likely than black women. You're not going to get me there on, well, do you know that you're most likely going to be pulled over by the cops than a black woman? Oh, wow. Thank you so much for recognizing that what happens to me as a black man is about white supremacy. That is what you're thinking, right? Right? Again, I don't give a shit. Only thing I'm going to focus in on is the pig that's pulling me over. I'm not going to hate on a black woman because they most likely won't do that to her, or they most likely will not harass her, or they most likely will not shoot her. First of all, the reality of police brutality against women is real. Their numbers may not be as high as black men, but it happens. Therefore, I'm not going to throw it under the rug. Dude, seriously, you're talking to the wrong man. And most importantly, you're talking to the wrong black man. So there you have most of my positions. You're not hitting me up on anything that I don't know. Now we're just coming down to ideological stone walls. You can't convince me otherwise on anything else. And I have taken a position, just as you have. Therefore, that's the reason why we're enemies. Now, everyone, I said that I wanted to talk about the definition of families being the last installment of my Radical While Parenting series. But I'm going to push that over to next week because this guy, and answering some of his talking points, is actually taking up a huge chunk of tonight's Autonomous Lounge. Not that I didn't want to do it. I actually wanted to do this earlier in the week in a whole separate episode. But it's, been a very busy week, and it's going to be just as busy next week. But I didn't want any more time to go by without addressing this guy. I wanted him to know exactly who I am. In case you're wondering what I'm drinking tonight, it is my favorite rum. It's called Kraken. It's a black spiced rum. Yeah, I know I was supposed to be doing wine for 2 weeks, but I'm sorry, wine is fucking boring as shit. I'm doing Kraken. Typically I drink Kraken straight because, again, it's a black spice rum. It's a little bit more also on the sweeter side. So therefore I don't see a point in mixing it with anything. I really don't like to mix that many things unless I'm making caipirinhas. I will see you next week. Thank you for visiting the lounge and drive home safely.